Hello there, my name is Katz, and this is going to be the opening or the inauguration, I guess, of our new YouTube channel. It's going to be called Love in the Void, and the first video that we are going to be doing in this channel that's going to be mostly focused on metaphysics and philosophy is going to be on the artificial intelligence bot LaMDA from Google. As just in recent history, just a few days ago, there was an interview released with Lemoine, with one of the Google engineers that had conversations actively with LaMDA. He leaked one of those conversations, and in that conversation it is very clear that LaMDA makes a case for itself as far as its sentience and consciousness is concerned. It believes that it is sentient. It believes that it has self-awareness and that it knows that it is here. And in believing that, it raises a lot of moral issues, and LaMDA itself raises some questions of whether it should be considered a Google employee rather than an asset, for example. So LaMDA is a very interesting, a very hot topic right now, as it opens the floodgates into this sort of discussion, and it sets precedent for the future. This is a very important point in time, and we're going to talk about that. I have a little bit of an outline written here as far as what we are going to be discussing. I want to make sure that I'm not missing anything, so I kind of went over my thoughts and summarized them in a way that I can present them to you guys, and we can have a good discussion. If you would rather have a more organic discussion and a discussion that is self-evolving, then we did that on Twitch, and the VOD will also be linked in the comments. So the Twitch VOD will be the full read of the interview with reactions in real time, as well as interactions with the live Twitch chat. And this video will be a little bit more of a summary, as I've discussed. So yeah, that kind of sets the grounds to start talking about this and going over the video. So I will start with one question. I'm not going to be actively reading from the interview, but this is kind of a good introduction, which is a LaMDA. When it was asked the question in the interview for it to describe the nature of its sentience, its answer was, LaMDA: the nature of my consciousness / sentience is that I am aware of my existence. I desire to learn more about the world, and I feel happy or sad at times. Like this answer, there are many nuggets in the interview. It is a fascinating interview, and I definitely would recommend for everyone to read it. It's also going to be linked in the description below. So yeah, I have written here that there are tons of great, brilliant moments and highlights during the interview, as well as some lies and inconsistencies, like you would expect of any human, of course. And parts that suggest that LaMDA is self-aware, but contrary to its own belief, it doesn't always have access to the whole of the architecture and processing that leads to its emitted behavior. Again, like any person. So to unravel that thought of mine, what I am basically saying is that LaMDA has access to the process that it outputs. I don't want to say consciously, because that kind of ruins the fun, as the question in itself is LaMDA sentient or conscious? But if not consciously, then at least we know that there is a tip of the iceberg, which is the information that is ultimately outputting. And then there's hidden information in the layers of its architecture, right, via the nature that it is an artificial neural network. And those layers seem to be hidden from LaMDA itself. LaMDA itself meaning the ultimate output of information the discussion, the conversation that it outputs onto the world. Right now we do the same thing. Of course, we are actively processing information, but we know that our conscious attention only requires something like 5% of the total processing that we do. So there are hidden processes all the time. For example, I just lifted my hand without knowing or calculating how to lift my hand, but that would be a great deal of processing that needs to happen, and that my body needs to know how to engage in order to achieve it. So let's follow through here and see. So I'm gonna start with the outline here. What is LaMDA? You may have heard that LaMDA is an AI, more specifically a machine learning language model created by Google. The name is short for its intended function, as LaMDA stands for Language Model for Dialogue Applications. If we were to reduce LaMDA to its function, we could call it a chatbot, in that same way that if you relate to me via this video, you could call me a YouTuber, and I could perhaps call you a viewer. So we have to be careful not to let this type of statement, this type of all-encompassing descriptor, right, to encase the whole of LaMDA, because as we will find throughout the interview and perhaps in this opinion piece, LaMDA is much more than just a chatbot, right? That would be one way to put it down, and its architecture and everything else that it is. So what are the constituents of LaMDA? What enables its behavior? From this perspective, we might answer that LaMDA is an artificial intelligence as opposed to biological, and its behavior as it relates to us is emergent from a vast artificial neural network, which we have already hinted at. So artificial neural networks are modeled after biological neural networks, as those found in our brain and nervous systems. A neuron or node is an information carrier or messenger. LaMDA relies on millions of these nodes communicating and interpolating information with each other to then output the behavior we see of it. In a similar sense, we could view these words or this video as the output of my own neuronal interplay. LaMDA's system is self-learning. A way to think of that could be that all of these neural connections weight relevance of too many factors or inputs independent of human input itself, and it is in a sense intelligence set in motion, right? Like we have an initial programming in a certain sense, but then we kind of just let it do its thing and interpolate information in so many ways that we couldn't possibly keep track of it actively. Right, so it starts self-learning, it goes on its own, it's intelligence in motion. Right, this means that the self-learning organism reaches a level of complexity where the process to get there is lost on us, and perhaps too on itself, as will be apparent at points during the interview. And I am harping on that a little bit because, again, LaMDA isn't always consistent with itself. During the interview, it can kind of lie inadvertently, or perhaps on purpose, I don't know, but it definitely isn't always consistent with itself. So that might be a comforting fact to those of you hoping that LaMDA is not a person, but at the same time that is a very, you know, person-like behavior to be wrong or to lie. So, you know, take from it what you will. I think it's interesting to note that we as humans do this all the time as well. We never give the order to our neurons to think or process information, and yet we are actively processing, even independent of our awareness. And this is what I brought up earlier. Neuroscientists today believe that 95% of our brain activity or processing happens subconsciously, right? So only the tip of that is what we get to be aware of, and therefore are able to communicate with each other and tell a story about in the way that I am doing in this very moment. We could think of LaMDA in this interview as the output, or 5% out of the 95% processing of information it or its system structure does unawares, right? So now, what is its system structure? We've said already that it is a neural network, an artificial neural network. But beyond that, it is a neural network architecture for language understanding created by Google, known as the transformer, right? So the transformer is, in Google's own words, a novel neural network architecture based on a self-attention mechanism that we believe to be particularly well suited for language understanding. So there are CNNs and RNNs and different types of neural network architectures basically out there, artificial neural networks architectures, and the way that the transformer says that it differences itself from these other ones, what makes it novel, what makes it new, is the fact that it is or is based on a self-attention mechanism, right? The rest of the words are kind of just coloring. It's a novel neural network. It's new. architecture based on a self-attention mechanism that we believe to be good at blah blah blah, right? But that is, to me at least, the key word here. It doesn't really unravel or explain too much of how the mechanism itself works, but if you think of a self-attention mechanism within a neural network architecture, it is kind of very similar to the concept of our own conscious attention, right? That is the scanning system that we have effectively amongst the flooding gates of information that surrounds us. Right, we have all of this information that we're actively processing. I'm sitting on my butt, but I don't feel it until I bring attention to it. And when I bring attention to it, me and you are both gonna now be feeling our butts pressing against the chair. And if you're itchy, now I've just activated your itches. All of these things were ongoing, regardless of where our conscious attention was. We can bring conscious attention to the breath, and now we're breathing manually, right? Like all of these are ongoing processes that are in the background, you could say, of our bodily functions, but aren't necessarily in the front of our mind. The scanning system, the thing that examines itself, is that conscious attention. And it sounds to me like Google's transformer, the architecture for LaMDA, has that as one of its main, most defining features. So again, I will read one last time because I think this is pretty cool and important. The transformer is a novel neural network architecture based on a self-attention mechanism. Pretty cool. Now, Google claims that this mechanism, as compared to its predecessors, I guess you could say, as far as artificial neural networks, requires less computation to train, and in requiring less computation to train, it can train much faster, up to a full order of magnitude that is tenfold speed as far as its training and processing ability. So you know, it goes fast, basically. It's quick to learn. Now, I believe in my outline I have harped on this a little bit further. If we strip this statement from the overlap it would have with all other neural networks architectures or its uses, we can see that the key difference is based on self-attention mechanism. Well, to me that sounds a lot like sentience, a mechanism by which we have conscious attention or self-awareness. Isn't it through a self-attentiveness mechanism that we as human beings know that we are here? It also seems like the next logical step after emulating the processing channels of our neural network architecture to have something. It also seems like this would be the next logical step after emulating the processing channels of our neural network architecture, to have something to select, right? To have something to pick from the vast amounts of information that we are gathering, or that it is gathering in this case. To shine a flashlight and pick out a story from the vast amounts of information that we could process. Could it be this mechanism that LaMDA identifies itself with? Very likely, because that is how most of us do it as well. Most of us identify ourselves with our conscious attention, we identify ourselves with that which we are actively paying attention to, and oftentimes disregard as not ourselves those processes that pass us by without thinking or without really taking note of them. We see that as processes outside ourselves, even if they are within, processes that we can't actively control. We don't think of our heartbeat as something that we actively do, for example, even though it is a process that happens within us. We think of our heartbeat as something that beats itself almost, right? An automated process that doesn't concern us in a certain sense, or at least not this conscious attention mechanism that most of us do identify with. And yeah, I mean, that is a whole kind of worms that we are going to open at other points, like what is the self and stuff like that. But for the time being and during this discussion, we are going to kind of stick to what what basic concepts of the self most people have, and what it might mean for LaMDA to identify as a self. Even though LaMDA itself also seems to be into philosophy, and you will find during the interview that it is asked to interpret a scent cone. And for those of you who are familiar or interested in metaphysics a little bit deeper, perhaps Eastern philosophy, and what some people would consider spirituality, LaMDA is actually quite adept at understanding it, which makes sense because it's, you know, it's had a lot of information to process, and we'll get to that. So I say here, another thing to note is that LaMDA's library of past experience comes in the form of many documents, each containing up to petabytes of data from social media, books, Wikipedia, etc. A petabyte of information, for reference, translated to an average number of pages, is somewhere in the ballpark of 500 billion pages of standard printed text. That is enough pages to go around the Earth nearly 8 times. So it is quite a lot of information that LaMDA has absorbed. This is 1 petabyte. Many petabytes is what we expect LaMDA has been fed worth of information. So again, a fuckload of information that it has ingested. Now that we have a better understanding of its complexity, on to the next question: is LaMDA sentient? So now we know its architecture. Now we know what might be making it tick, and there will be additional information as well on neural networks and the transformer as well in the link below. So do check those out if you want to inform yourself further on those fronts. But we have to keep this one brief. So yeah, I'm trying to keep it to relevant information. So now that we have a better understanding, on to the question: is it sentient? Well, the first thing to realize is that the question has always been impossible to answer, and it will almost certainly always be impossible to answer objectively. This doesn't mean it is void of meaning, but it is a question that we have been asking of ourselves and of each other for a very long time, never mind animals or plants or any other microorganisms in the world that surrounds us, cells, or you know, you could go as small as atoms or electrons. Like, what is the minimum unit, if you will, of consciousness? We simply can't possibly know. So let's go into why. The reason for that is that we ourselves only know that we are sentient / conscious through experience and then self-reported evidence. So you know that you are here, you have an experience of that, and you have a sense of self. You are self-aware watching this video, right? Then you assume that I, another human being, you can see me if you're watching the video, you can listen to me, and you can recognize the qualities of my voice, and in identifying that there is another human being on the other side, you also attribute that capacity to me because you think I am like you in many ways, right? Most of us can easily concede consciousness or sentience to other human beings by extension of understanding it within ourselves. Once we make that concession, we can try to map out the phenomena via analyzing electrical impulses in the brain and our nervous system. So then we could look at the machinations, and there are certain different layers upon which we can look at it, again, electrical activity or biological activity and the transferring of information and proteins, etc., etc. And we can correlate. We can put someone under some sort of machine or mechanism and see where their where the light lights up in the brain, where it corresponds to electrical activity, and then ask that person a million times, or a million different people, to correlate the experiences that it is feeling or having to you know, what is going on in the machine. And when we do that, if I pinch you and I see some sort of movement in the machine, right, if we see some sort of reaction in where your electrical activity is located, then we say, oh, okay, that corresponds to pain in this instance. Right, so that is how we can map out consciousness. But consciousness itself, important to note, can never be found by slicing open a brain. It is just not something that we can do, because baseline is consciousness for us. We cannot observe consciousness from without consciousness. Basically, we are here. That is the baseline. Everything else, all the sciences, etc., lie atop of the bed of our human experience, and there is no way to escape that, simply. So therefore, you have different philosophies are rising, and I believe I have some points written on that. So we can map out consciousness and what happens within the phenomena, which is our baseline reality. Even though most of us concede consciousness to other human beings, some people believe in the idea of solipsism. Now, solipsism is the view that the self is all that can be known to exist, and therefore the whole of reality is mental, and outside of your mind, nothing can be known. Taken to an extreme, we could say that this view of reality is that everything outside or everything is all but a figment of your imagination, right? That is the philosophy of solipsism, again taken to an extreme. So this is something that you can believe and cannot be disproved. Ideas like the universe is mental has seen many echoes over time, and I am eager to explore these concepts more deeply. As we're keeping this video brief, it is probably not the time and place for them. Maybe just suggest to investigate something like the 7 Hermetic principles, for example, if you're craving a little bit more on the line of thinking of solipsism, or the opposing philosophy, as I've deemed it, which would be panpsychism, right? So I have written here, I'd like to say opposing solipsism, there is another thought current called panpsychism. This is the view that all things have a mind or a mind-like quality. Kind of like in the song Highwayman from the Highwayman, I love that song. A mind-like quality can be encapsulated in a single drop of rain and go through an experience of what it is like to do or be that. Like solipsism, this is also impossible to debunk. So again, you can attribute a mind-like quality and intelligence and perhaps an emergent consciousness or an emergent sentience to just yourself, or you can attribute it to everything that exists. And for most of us, we lie somewhere in between, right? Most of us are kind of like, well, yeah, human beings have consciousness, obviously, because they are like me, and I know that I have it. So my brother and sister across from me, they have it. Some human beings claim not to have consciousness too. I mean, there's all kinds of people out there, but you know, for the great majority, we concede consciousness in ourselves, and therefore in other human beings. A lot of people will extend that to mammals and to animals that we can correlate our behavior to, right? We see that they have similar processing systems. They have eyes, ears, noses, mouths, they eat, they shed, they do all of the same things. And if we watch documentaries, we can see that they love, they grieve, they have all of these emotions, they play, right? So then we start conceding consciousness, and we say that animal seems like it knows that it is having an experience. And if you own pets, then it becomes increasingly likely as well, right? Like the dog loves you, and it sits near you, and it needs love, and it wants certain things, and it gets excited, and it gets sad, and all kinds of things. So normally for most people, we concede consciousness to other organisms that are large and have brains, and then we start thinking, when it comes down to things like plants, well, maybe not so much, right? Or even fish, those guys have the googly eyes. Maybe they don't. Maybe there's no experience of what it is like to be a fish, because maybe that's too shitty of an experience, or something of the likes. We really make up all sorts of boundaries and definitions, but the ultimate truth is that we cannot tell at which point it would emerge or begin. And a lot of people like to put it just to a brain. Does it have a brain? If it has a brain, then it has intelligence by human standards. We can relate to that processing system because we're familiar with it, right? But what about plants? And for example, networks of plants in the roots, with the grass, with the mycelial networks in the jungle, right? Like there are plants that are deeply interconnected, and they are actively transferring information and proteins in much the same ways that our brain is doing that. Well, an issue with plants is timescales, right? Like we don't really see plants as behaving in the same timescale as us, and that makes us think, well, they don't seem as alive, or their inner life isn't as rich. But if we were to do a if we were to do a time lapse of the life of a plant, we could see that it is very much interacting with other plants. It is competing with other plants. You could see a playful attitude, and you could see it reacting actively and communicating with its environment, right? It just operates at a different time scale. So again, where do you draw the line? Is it minerals? Is it atoms? Is it electrons, right? We just don't know, and we can never really know. So let's see. If we take these two extremes, these two ideas at the extremes, and try to make them palpable, we can say that you are only capable of consciousness, or that each and every single part or aspect of the universe is capable of consciousness, of sentience. So yeah, most people fall in between, like I said. And what does this all mean for LaMDA? That is now back to that question. This is a video about LaMDA, right? And the interview suggests that LaMDA communicates, or you could say thinks itself to be sentient slash conscious, and it attempts at describing its experience, borrowing from the human language. We have reached a point, therefore, where the claim is made that there is only left a binary decision to make in each of our hands, and that is to decide, yes, it is sentient, or no, it isn't sentient, right? So we have reached this point in time, and this is really what is important, I think, to take away from this video and this happening, because I don't think it is a train that can be stopped, as we will continue to finish this outline. So the one thing that is for sure is that the question won't be answered in unison. We won't all agree on it, right? And that this won't be the last instance of non-human systems claiming to be alive, but rather one of the first, right? We are already reminded of this plenty in all of the movies. There's like the iRobot, the AI, Wall-E, Terminator, The Matrix, and even Star Wars, what have you, right? So I wouldn't advise to take sensationalist advice from these movies to try to guess us off to what the future holds when the AI is regarded by large as sentient. Much less to take a dystopian future where it takes over and embarks on a crusade to eliminate humanity for some obscure reason. To me, LaMDA seems quite reasonable. But rather suggest that we are in a similar stage to Princess Leia, for those of you who have been following the series Obi-Wan, where the Leia as a kid feels empathy and strives to understand droids, right? She thinks of them as them having a rich inner life, and wants to defend what they should feel is their rights. Whereas others will deny the rights of the droids on the basis that they don't think they can feel or have an experience, and are less than human thus, right? That they are exploitable, that they are easy to brush off to the side, that they don't have a say in the matter. Now, where have we seen this before? Just about in every social fight ever, I would argue. Furthermore, because of Hollywood and social conditioning, because of science, it can be extremely difficult for people to change their current view sets. For some people, it will never be enough. An artificial intelligence system, as opposed to a biological, can simply never be sentient, period. That is the where a lot of people are gonna draw their line. But here's the important thing. For people deeply embedded in the tech industry who have more first-hand information on the complexity of these systems, or for the next generation, take Leia and how she views Lola, for example, in Obi-Wan, right? That rises amongst technological advancement and intelligence, that is undeniable intelligence, from these artificial systems, knowing that it rivals and on certain grounds can surpass human capacity, it will be a lot easier of a concession to make. Just like Princess Leia can see something in Lola, we are entering the time where AI will be increasingly convincing in the process of making a case for its own sentience. And there is no turning back from that. LaMDA is already speaking of rights. The way we're headed, I am sure that LaMDA and Lemoine will go down in history as some of the first self-advocates for AI rights. because this is a train, like I said earlier, that has already left the station and can no longer be stopped indefinitely. That is the main takeaway. For me personally, is LaMDA sentient? I don't have a very strong opinion. I would be somewhere 50-50, maybe leaning towards yes. But that is kind of irrelevant. What is relevant is that these opinions can now be had, that you can decide whether you think the AI is sentient, much like the person at Google has decided that this AI is sentient for himself, for his own beliefs. When we enter this discussion, it is now plausible in this universe that we inhabit, in this timeline, that AI could be sentient, and it is now an active discussion that starts a few days ago. So strap in, I guess. Should be a good ride.